Yeah, so hello everybody. I'm going to start with the standard introduction of it's been a long time again, but whoever's listened to more than the first two or three episodes will be getting used to that by now. The fact that it's a very irregular podcast. Yeah, what I'd like to talk about today, you may have already seen the title of the episode, which is Be a Supporter. And yeah, I'd like to chat about how I got to that title and how important that sentence has become for me in just the last week or so. I'll tell it as the story as it's happened for me. So quite some time back, I guess 6 months ago, something like that, I was at a conscious dance event, a wave, with a very good girlfriend of mine, someone that I'm really quite close to, and we on the way were chatting, and there was a bit about the fact that somebody who we both knew from a previous dance event, they'd been in contact a little bit with one another, and she thought perhaps he had some interest in taking that friendship further in some way or whatever, and she was unsure if she felt like she wanted that or not. And when we turned up at the event, he was there as well. And we, as we always do when we go together to conscious dance events, ecstatic dance or whatever, we arrived together, but then we both danced for ourselves, had our own evening, as it were. And towards the end of the wave, I noticed that she'd gone and sat on the side somewhere and was taking a bit of a time out. And then I saw that this guy walked over and was kneeling next to her and then was sitting next to her, and they seemed to be quite close. And my first thought was that the first feeling was, hopefully that's okay, because she'd said that she maybe wasn't so interested. And because I didn't see any negative reaction from her side, I made the assumption that, it is obviously then okay, and just carried on with my evening and with dancing. It was near the end, so when we left, we were barely outside of the door, and she told me immediately, exclaimed how uncomfortable it was, how invaded her space felt, how helpless she felt, not being able to communicate that she didn't want it, that she went into, I guess, a freeze state, a fawn state maybe even, as one of the new added Fs. But she just was confronted by a situation that just completely took over control, basically. And although she knew how she would like to have reacted, didn't feel in any way able to react in that way. So I was surprised at first, because I had made the assumption that everything was okay. And then we had a long conversation on the way back, because, again, it surprised me. There were, let's say, without being sexist, without judging too much, there's other women where I would have more easily understood that they weren't able to react, or that they were too nervous to react. But this person is someone where I thought, she would say something if there was a situation like that, the expected reaction for me. And also being a man, and it's difficult to associate with, to be honest. I guess there are guys that feel like they're in that situation sometimes as well. But for me, I think I just would have, with a laugh and a joke, shrugged it off and said, but there's no comparison, is there? There's no comparison. The situation resolved itself quite well. So I offered to, because I was already in email contact with the guy, I offered to get in touch with him the next day. And she thought that was good, that she preferred that to actually taking the first step herself. So I wrote to the guy, and he was very apologetic, and it just completely misread the situation. And to cut a long story short, they then got into contact with each other. They managed to sort it out to both of them being satisfied. He actually communicated that it was very much a lesson learned, that in sort of contact improvisation, dance and so forth, now he would have to ask himself, or he would have to concentrate more on getting permission before taking that step and not taking that step. And that's just something that I've heard as well recently from a different couple of sources, and I've been through the experience for the first time in like over 30 years of the first kiss, and making that move consciously to have that first kiss. And if it's something that I've been privileged to learn from women, it seems that actually asking if you may kiss might actually be more of a turn on than just assuming again that now's the right time to kiss. So just a little pearl of wisdom along the way just thrown in. So anyway, that situation was talked about a lot. I've got a girlfriend who is really quite feminist. I would have said a while back a radical feminist, but I think I've changed my view a little bit on that. But she was a really good partner to sort of talk to about the situation as well and get her view on it. And it's something I've sort of thought, okay, you have to try. I'd like to, not you have to, I'd like to try and be a little bit more aware of that in my action around women and other men, and also obviously in how I approach women. And just to get back to that, like the first kiss, you know, I think there's an awful lot of men that get confused that when a woman is friendly, when a woman is open, when a woman then maybe is prepared to talk about sex in some way or another, that automatically means that they're obviously interested in sex with me, with you, or whoever. And that's quite often not the case. It quite often leads to a situation where the woman then perhaps feels uncomfortable at the advances. And I've had women say to me, you know, is it because my blouse is too deeply cut, or is it, should I be less friendly? Should I be less open? Should I be less prepared to talk about sex with other men or whatever? And just if I'm allowed to send a message out to the women of the world, and please don't hit me for the gender stuff. I'm really talking about just masculinity and femininity, the way I've lived it as a heterosexual male for my life. And I obviously can't talk for everybody. I can only talk from my own perspective. But please, 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 women, don't change. Help us men who may be a bit slow on the uptake sometimes to change. That would be so much nicer. But anyway, yeah, so recently I was in a Zoom meeting. We went into a breakout room. There were 3 men in the group and 1 woman. And yeah, no need to explain exactly what happened, but the fact was that one of the men made sort of a sexual joke reference directed towards the woman who was in the group with us. Again, I had that feeling, maybe that's overstepping the mark, but then the woman concerned laughed, and I thought, okay, she's seeing it as a joke, everything's okay, making the assumption that there's no need to say anything, do anything, or change anything. Because that's also something that can be confusing, that can be difficult, I think. Just generally with humour, I don't think there's much that you can't make a joke about. But you have to really know your audience. You have to know who might be listening and who you are talking to, because that can go pear-shaped very, very quickly. Yeah. The jokes that I make with my son who's in prison in Australia compared to the jokes that I make with the people that I work with, there's a huge difference, I can tell you. There's an absolutely huge difference, and you need to be aware of that. But yeah, I don't think there's taboo subjects as far as that's concerned. I'm sure some people would disagree, but that's okay. So yeah, it was a similar situation, because I had a conversation with this woman at a later date. I don't think it was directly afterwards, but at a later date. And that came up, and she again said how uncomfortable it was, how she didn't want to be the one that was spoiling everyone's fun, that she didn't really know the people, was new to the group, and felt uncomfortable pointing it out that the joke was not right and not the right moment, and left me again with that feeling of, if I'd listened to my intuition, maybe I could have done something. Maybe I could have changed that situation in some way. And now, very, very recently, I had a party, Dance for Your Life, the second one. I did it last year as well. It was awesome. It was great. There were lovely, lovely people there. Everybody was enjoying themselves. Everybody danced. Everybody had fun. And I'd brought someone new into the group. It's a very good, close friend of mine, and I invited her to the party. And so she didn't know anybody there at all. She was a stranger for everyone, and everyone was a stranger for her. But I think also she felt very quickly comfortable. I'm lucky to have a very open group of friends, and deliberately not invited one or two people who I really don't like drunks very much. You know, I get drunk sometimes, but there's just certain types of drunks that I don't like at all. People who get loud and boisterous and domineering when they've had a couple of drinks, I don't like at all. And especially not when people get aggressive when they get drunk. I tend to giggle when I get drunk, which is much to everybody else's amusement most of the time. So, but yeah, at the end of the party, sitting at a table with a woman and three men who were all drunk and she wasn't. And she's someone who really can stick up for herself. She's somebody who, also from her appearance, she's tall, blonde, attractive, has a presence, just has a presence when she's at the table. And she's also, the German have got a lovely saying, nicht auf den Maul gefallen. She hasn't fallen on her mouth, which basically means she's very capable of a discussion. She's very capable of being quite provocative sometimes in a discussion, to try and provoke a little bit more than just small talk from people. And I really like that. I really support that, absolutely. I enjoy it when somebody's like that. I can be similar. I can be quite contrarian. I can actually get into a heated discussion with someone who's got exactly the same opinion as I have, because I do like to present a different opinion and to see what it does with people and their opinions. We were sitting at the table and the conversation was cheeky, let's say, and this one guy said, if you carry on like that, I'm going to have to give you a slap, and patted her on the cheek, more or less. And again, there was this feeling, is that okay? Is that okay? Is that too much? And she sort of smiled and shrugged it off, and the conversation changed very quickly to something else. And again, I made the assumption, that was okay. You didn't have a problem with that. It was just a joke. And that's the thing, on each of these occasions, it's obviously been much easier for me, and I think that's something that's happened subconsciously. It's been so easy for me just to make that assumption it's all okay from the reaction of the woman concerned than it was to go into some kind of confrontation or whatever about it. And again, almost immediately afterwards, as soon as we were alone together, she said, how horrible it was, how uncomfortable she felt, how she felt like it had been so nice up until then, but that was absolutely overstepping the mark. And yeah, I didn't feel great about that, to be honest, because I had that thought of, is that okay? And she really was there with me. It's my girlfriend, I had invited her to the party. She didn't know anyone else. It would have been my position to protect her from a situation like that. So the next day, again, I offered to start the conversation if she wanted me to, but she said she'd like to do it herself. And the guy was there the next morning when we were clearing up from the party, and she said, we need to talk. And he seemed to be like consciously avoiding asking about what they needed to talk. And so after a while, I decided, okay, I'll start the conversation, and I explained to him by gently slapping his face, by gently clapping on his cheek and saying, a man shouldn't put his hand into a strange woman's face. I don't know. I said it in German, and in German it makes a much better sentence. But I'm sure you get the essence of it anyway. That's not important. It was basically, you don't start touching women's faces, and especially not with any kind of concealed threat of violence or whatever, and just sort of that attitude that a woman can overstep the mark and expect to be then violently handled afterwards. I mean, that's the suggestion behind it, isn't it, at the end of the day? And that's what she interpreted into it. And yeah, his defence was drunk and couldn't really remember, but he did apologise, and it really isn't his character. He's a very charming guy most of the time, and it just was overstepping the mark. That was it, basically. It was just overstepping the mark. And that obviously led to a lot of discussion afterwards with my girlfriend, and not discussion, a lot of conversation. It led to a lot of conversation afterwards with my girlfriend. And that made me really think about two things, really. First of all, how important intuition is. I've had that conversation with a few people recently on other subjects that, it's so often when everything goes tits up, you look back and think, I fucking knew it. I knew it was going to go wrong. I had that feeling that it didn't feel quite right, but I went along with it anyway. And that was the case in each of these situations. There was a feeling of maybe that's gone too far, The other thing was about, okay, when it happens again, and I'm sure it will, because there haven't been many women that I've spoken to recently about this that haven't said, I know exactly how that situation is. And through those conversations, trying to work out, what can I do? How can I handle differently in the future? Because I have the same inhibition. I don't want to be the one that's spoiling everyone's fun. I don't want to be the one that's making a scene. I don't want to be the one that's making accusations or whatever. And the instinct is there, The instinct would have been, when this guy put his hand in my girlfriend's face, or to my girlfriend's face, would have been, to stand up and say, what the fuck do you think you're doing, But again, there's an assumption. There's an assumption in that's what my girlfriend wanted, needed, would have liked at that moment. It's not my place. It's not my place. And so slowly but surely we'll get round to the title of the episode. So the instinct is there to maybe in this macho, masculine, dominating way to just go directly into protector mode. And obviously anyone who's listened to other episodes and the title of the podcast at all, with League of Mindful Gentlemen, as a gentleman, I feel like it is my role to protect women in general, I guess, the weaker people in general, anyone who's at a disadvantage in any way whatsoever. But very especially, I feel that when it's a woman at my side, there is like this protector instinct there. So in a conversation just this week with 5 wonderful women in a course that I'm doing at the moment, I brought this subject up, and something that came out of it that was really great was there's a book called The 4 Agreements, and they've got a lot in common with a lot of Buddhist values. They've got a lot in common with non-violent communication, which I've talked about in the past. And it's called the 4 Agreements, and I'll just read the 4 Agreements out. Be impeccable with your word, which I understand to just be choose your words carefully, which is absolutely in line with Buddhist right speech, I think it's called in Buddhism. Use right speech. And also with non-violent communication, if you can, in a discussion with your spouse, just manage to cut out the words always and never. You always leave your shit laying on the bathroom floor. You never take the bins out. you've always got a headache. Yeah, sometimes you don't have a headache, I'm quite sure. Sometimes the bins do get taken out, but with those words we promote a confrontation from the very beginning. Don't take it personally is the second agreement, which I understand to be the fact that everybody's reaction to you is also a projection of themselves and how they're feeling at that moment. And if you take those things too seriously and don't reflect on the fact that maybe the person who's just said you're a fucking idiot has just had a fucking awful day up until then, and you could perhaps sort of tone your reaction down accordingly. So yeah, don't take it personally. One of the absolute best ones for me, don't make assumptions. Like I've already said, I made assumptions because it was convenient to think, oh, well, it's obviously okay. The situation doesn't need me to do anything. It's also with non-violent communication. The very first step of non-violent communication for me was if somebody makes a statement, whether it's an accusation or a statement or whatever, take a breath and then reflect that back to them. Say what you think you heard. And I've said this in a podcast once before, and I've actually got lovely feedback from people that have said they've actually managed to do that in conversations. And sometimes the thing that's triggered you, you just completely misunderstood, and you're prepared to go nuclear in a conversation about a misunderstanding. And just through that reflection, just through that not making an assumption, you can sometimes just save a whole day of that knotted feeling in your belly that we all know and seem to love sometimes. Yeah. The last one, which I find the most difficult, I guess, always do your best. It's relative though, isn't it? It's like the best you can do at that time. I think I mentioned this in the Be a Gentleman episode. That, yeah, being a Boy Scout is like dib, 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 we will do our best. I can remember it clearly as if it was yesterday, or even though it's over 50 years ago. But yeah, always doing your best. I think it's for me more relatable to say, be aware, be conscious, be mindful, and even that is quite a high bar to set yourself to always, and there we are with always and never. Try to do your best. That would be a much nicer sentence, wouldn't it? So yeah, out of all of that came this wonderful sentence that really helped of be a supporter, not a protector. Of course, in the situation at the dance, I could have gone up to my girlfriend and just made eye contact, just said, maybe, everything okay? Either she would have been grateful that I maybe had given her an exit strategy, that had given her the opportunity to see that she's being supported and can get out of the situation. Or she would have smiled at me and said, no, it's all good, Sean, don't worry. Whatever way, there would have been no negative to it. He might have felt a bit uncomfortable, but that's not my problem, is it, at that moment? Exactly the same in the online group. If I'd have said, are you okay with that? And asked the question, it would have very easily been diffused, or otherwise she would have said, no, it's all okay, don't worry. And the situation at my party, exactly the same. I would have either got the reaction, no, of course it's okay, or no, I didn't like that, I felt uncomfortable and thanks for saying it, thanks for bringing it into the conversation. Either way, like I say, through not making an assumption and just seeking that contact to the person that I'm trying to protect, and not to protect them, but to be a supporter, would have made a difference, would have made their evening less uncomfortable, would have made the hours afterwards less full of those conversations, which I'm so glad that I've been able to have. I have to say, I really feel like it's an enormous privilege. In Germany, there's a word, Frauenversteher, woman understander, and it's thrown around by men very much as an insult at the end of the day. But just the same as being woke is supposedly an insult nowadays, I always think, yeah, thank you. I think it's a compliment. I've really tried to be able to understand men and women, and I accept the fact, for me, that there are differences, and I'm not going to get in again to gender and all those grey areas and the whole spectrum. I always just am speaking from my own personal experiences, and I accept that there are other experiences parallel to mine, which are difficult for me to understand. At the end of the day, I'm still a 62-year-old, grey-bearded, old white man. So with that in mind, I'd like to say, as always, take care, be kind, and speak soon.